The South African Water Chamber was to create a credible and strong link between organised private sector and government. But where exactly are we in the quest for water security, resilience, and a circular economy, and what have we accomplished to date? Stay with us as we talk to the founders of the South African Water Chamber. If you're just joining us, welcome to the conversation. I'm your host, Brigitte Limbanda from Cape Town in South Africa, and this live stream is brought to you by BeLive Media and the South African Water Chamber. This is an audience-centric show, and we are monitoring the comments, so please feel free to say hello, to ask questions to our panel. Our panel today comprises of Professor Anthony Turton, Platt, and Benoit Leroy. All three are founders of the South African Water Chamber. So do join us. Gentlemen, welcome to the live stream.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to you and the listeners.
Now, the South African Water Chamber was established to form a strong link, but more importantly, a credible link between the private sector and government. And I think what we'd like to find out is, where are we? What have we accomplished? Why was it established? And I think I'm going to start off with you, Benoit, just to give us a bit of background with regards to the South African Water Chamber for those who don't know why it was established and what the need was and what the aims and objectives are. Can I get you to start us off, please?
Thanks, Brigitte, and greetings to our audience. And I'll try and keep it below the proverbial 20 minutes. Very rapidly, we're really an aggregation of private sector interests in water infrastructure development. And our call to action came through when the Public-Private Growth Initiative in 2018 set about opening dialogue between the public and private sector with the presidency, facilitated by Rolf Meyer and company, and really using the Japanese Reconstruction Development Plan, or Marshall Plan, that was enacted after 1945, where government and the private sector could talk about how to rebuild a country after war. We've been at a type of war, and the private sector has been decimated, and there's distrust between the public and private sector. And this PPGI initiative engendered to put forward not company interests, but let's say sectoral interests. And we were the 18th, I think, sector at the time. The first was the Automotive Association, and then agriculture. And we presented our case to the presidency in that without water, you have no lubricant for the economy, because it's a fundamental economic enabler. And we now have, I think, 26 or 27 sectors, and we've managed to do quite a few things. And really notably, we've got a sectoral master plan, which is, what is the price tag? It was 900 billion in 2018. It's now about R1 trillion. And the number is an order of magnitude estimate. It could be quite a bit larger, but it's 2.5 Medupis or Kusilis. So that puts it into context. So that's the gap we've got to fill. But importantly is that we also, subsequent to that, embarked on an industrialization master plan, which is looking at the supply chain within the water sector. So anywhere from education and capacity building right through to the EPCs, engineering, procurement, and contracting companies, the financing institutions, the engineering consultants, the yellow plant, the sanitary ware, the taps, the piping, the pumps, and the tanks and the likes. And what we're busy doing, and we're nearly finished with the DTIC, is creating a master plan where plugging the gap of the trillion rand gap in infrastructure rollout over this decade. So we started in 2020, stimulates and catalyzes a whole lot of supply chain actions that really are industrialization, and where we've been net importers, we want to convert that to net exporters. So that's quite important because that's the kernel of the Marshall Plan. The third thing that's really come out of this is the National Infrastructure Plan, the NIP 2050, and we're going to break it down in 5-year chunks because 2050 is a long time away for a few of us here, and maybe not those in primary school. But what it seeks to do is 4 sectors, and it's water and energy, and then logistics, so harbors, ports, transport, railways, and digitalization of the economy, smart cities and the likes. But water is one of the 4 priorities, and in there, the language is what we were talking about in 2017, 2018, 2019 through the PPGI, Independent Water Regulator and all the like. So we represent a sector that is very fragmented, and we're trying to aggregate things. So we have the Engineering Council of South Africa, the Civil Engineers Institute. We have a whole lot of interests, Strategic Water Partnership Network, WESA, Water Research Commission, and we're really funneling them in so that we have this collective mass. So it's momentum, mass times velocity. So we are heard, we are credible, but we also enable, it's a two-way, let's say, communication channel. And what's happened is this NIP 2050 we can talk about later, is that we have now, instead of talking about plans, we actually have action items. Who does what by when and at what cost? And this is about to be gazetted. The draft was gazetted last month. We've sent in our comments this week, and about to be gazetted middle of October once the cabinet's approved this. And what this does is it actually enables, like in energy, private sector participation. So very exciting times. I think that's enough introduction from myself.
Thanks very much, Benoit. Fred, I'd like to bring you into the conversation here. A huge part of the South African Water Chamber and making it work was getting the buy-in of the business sector. If you can just touch on why that is so important, and what has it been like this far? How much buy-in have you gotten, and where do we still need to go in terms of a partnership with the business sector?
Yeah, thank you. I think, we got to a situation where I think a lot of people in the country started losing hope. And specifically within our industry, I think we all know what the impact has been on our industry as such. But what we realized quite early was that unless business marches in order, and unless business can put a united front and a plan forward to government, at the end of the day, we can't sit back and just be blaming government for their inaction when business is not organized. So the critical interface is to have an organized business, a representative business forum or association or organization that can interface with the various departments of government, and where business really looks at these interests and say, how do we unlock for the industry, because then everybody benefits. We've had great take up, but I think there's a lot that can be done from business. And I think now more than ever, Benoit has spoken about the National Infrastructure Plan 2050. It is critical. We now have a plan on the table. We're now no longer just talking, and we're not just having talk shops and that type of thing. We've actually got a plan, and business now needs to come behind this plan, interface with it and work with it. Otherwise, we will be equally culpable if this plan does not succeed.
Thanks, Fred. And Anthony, if we can pull you into the conversation at this point, from your perspective, why was this conversation so important? Why the need for the South African water chamber, and something that you've been talking about for a long time as well, is having an independent water regulator. Can you give us a bit of context?
Yes, without sort of hogging the conversation, I think it's important to go back to when we were setting up the chamber. We had a series of meetings with the PPGI team, Rolf Meyer, who's someone that I worked with in the past and have a good working relationship with. And we made it quite clear then that with all the lofty ideals of the PPGI, the private sector, nothing can happen without water, as Benoit said. Now, let's just quickly zoom in onto what the PPGI is about. They're talking about a 5% economic growth rate, sustained over decades. Now, this is something significant, because if we don't get that level of economic growth, we are not going to employ the people that have remained unemployed since 1994, and we're going to have a revolution. Simple as that. So it's not in our interest to go down that route at all. So the question now is, if we are going to aim at a 5% economic growth rate sustained over decades, then what role can water play in that? And now we start unpacking the water issue, and it gets very, very interesting. The first thing is that the sum of 1 trillion rand has to be mobilized. Now, under the current economic circumstances, with a failing economy, the tax revenue base of the country is under severe pressure. The fiscal cliff is marching relentlessly on, and very soon we're going to be in a position where government employees are not going to be able to get their salary at the end of the month, because there's just not enough money in the fiscus to pay for that. So we want to avoid that as well. And this has now opened up the conversation about how do we bring in private sector participation? How do we bring in private capital? Can we bring in private capital? And in fact, one of the problems has been that there's been an ongoing war against capital. Capital has been regarded as the enemy. So how do we redeploy capital? Because it's only private capital that's going to be able to make that kind of difference. So the emphasis now is on private sector participation, not privatization of the resource, not that at all. It's about how do we get private sector participation into the water sector to recapitalize the industry. And of course, we also need to understand that there's certain other really important factors to consider. And one of them is that water services are delivered by municipalities. Most municipalities are in distress in some form or other. Most municipalities have not got a strong enough balance sheet to raise capital. They can't do it. They're dependent on mega grants, infrastructure investment grants from government. Now, this has opened up a very interesting conversation, because how do we enable private sector participation to bring capital in, but at the same time to bring technology and skills to effectively stop the hemorrhaging of skills and to start rebuilding capacity at local level? And I think this has probably been one of the most significant advancements that we've made, because we've had some of the best legal and financial minds in the country now applying their minds to how to bring the Companies Act to bear on the Municipal Financial Management Act, to start plugging certain of the gaps in the Municipal Financial Management Act, which is about the accountability of executives in fiduciary positions. So that's another technical conversation, but we've been involved actively in that. And the take-home message is that the Water Chamber has now created a conceptual special purpose vehicle, which has got the approval, and Benoit will just correct me if I'm wrong, but the approval of Treasury and the Development Bank of Southern Africa, and this is basically going to become the way we're going to recapitalize the industry, but it's also going to become the way that we start rebuilding skills and holding people accountable. Those are the three things that are going to start coming out of this thing. And I think that the Water Chamber has been instrumental in all of those. So you also asked me the question about the regulator. So when we were talking about bringing investment into not only into the water sector, but investment into the economy, it became very clear that there is no credible regulatory authority in South Africa, because the Department of Water and Sanitation, that is supposed to be the regulator, is both a referee and a player. And given the dismal performance in the past and the fact that more and more municipalities are becoming delinquent, clearly they have not succeeded in their role. And therefore, we have to have an independent regulator if any financial authority is going to show any interest in our economy in general. So that's the reason why we need that independent water regulator, simply to unlock the investment channel. People won't put money into the economy if it's going to get stolen or misappropriated. So we have to account for it, and we have to put it into proper engineered design projects, and hold people accountable for that.
Thanks very much for that. Benoit, if I can circle back to you, for anything to be successful, you need the buy-in. Who are some of the partners so far that you are engaging with as the South African Water Chamber, and who back this initiative? Just to acknowledge those partnerships.
I think the most important is the Presidency, Treasury, DTIC, Department of Water, Sanitation, and COCTA. Also SALGA, South African Local Government Association. So that's on the public side. On the private side, we have a host of members, corporate and private members. And we also have associations with people like the Water Research Commission, the Water Institute of South Africa, that cut across really. Water Institute is the institute for the professionals of the water sector, so it's public and private. We have a lot of support within that institution, and Tony is a fellow of that institution. We also have support on our steering committee. We have Nedbank, and we have consulting engineers. So it's very wide. It needs to be bolstered. It needs to be wider. And, we have a bit of a chicken and egg situation where a lot of companies are fighting for survival. And the guys who are really successful are really exporting and plying their water trade in various parts of Africa and the world. So there's little time to spend in South Africa. So what we're trying to do is we don't have membership fees, for example. We actually have what we call sweat equity, where people make their time available, including legal fraternities, for example. So it's extremely wide. But what we're finding is that we're a top-down type of organization, because we started the presidency and the national ministries. And what we're finding is that from a bottom-up, we need to weave that in to the top-down approach. So, for example, the Institute of Plumbers of South Africa, IOPSA, are very involved in trying to get. We only have water bylaws in about a third of our municipalities. And the action, the water service provision, the WSPs, the water service providers, is at local municipality level. And those bylaws aren't in place for us to be able to address non-revenue water, reuse of water, twin piping systems, we can reuse grey water, etc. And if the legislation is not in place, you can't abide by the rule of law, the quality is not correct. So we've got to work top down, bottom up. So what we're finding, a lot of the associations that were not very obvious to us to start off with are able to operate at that level. Then we have people like BUSA, the National Business Institute, etc., where and then we've got, I think it's a CISA, which is basically the savings vehicle for the country, are all involved one way or another through the PPGI. So our incubator is really the PPGI at the moment, and it's extremely, extremely strong. And through that, we're able to actually evolve into an organization that represents a wider spectrum. So yes, we've been around for just over 3 years. It sounds like it is early days, but it also takes time to establish, let's say, the momentum. And in my 40 years in water, we never had to have an organized private water sector. We didn't. Now we need that, and it's very different to what we have. But the advantage is that as a country, we have a national master plan, and the US at the moment is struggling, especially in the western parts. They don't have a master plan. So, we're very critical of ourselves that we don't have this, don't have that. We are miles ahead of the Americans, okay? And yes, they've got lots of water in parts of their country, but where they don't have it, they're way behind us. So there's a lot of good And I think, to use Tony's words of hope and Fred's words of hope, is that we are in actual fact still one of the only countries, because we were the first in 1956 with the Water Act, to have a National Water Act and to have a master plan and industrialization plan. And this is good news, and this is good stuff, and this is what we need to actually build upon. So from that perspective, I'm really bullish that we can make it happen. The political climate is what we find is what's said in politics, what happens in our business and public-private discussions and collaborations are very different. And one must be able to separate these. So we're in electioneering at the moment, and I'm very glad, and I saw it again today in the media, is that water is one of the electioneering agendas, and that hasn't been for a very long time. So water is on the front stage, and to me, that gives us a lot of good hope, because it's a tool to either stay in power or to get into power, but it is a tool, it's on the front stage. And part of our reindustrialization plan, we can put in another 45 trillion rand in the economy through the trillion rand investment in water infrastructure, water and sanitation.
So not too long ago, just a couple of years ago, water was a huge conversation in South Africa, mainly thanks to the water crisis, the Cape Town water crisis more specifically. But unfortunately, we seem to be very reactionary. Is that one of the challenges that you have? How do we get the message across that we are a water constrained country, that and that this needs to be a priority, if we are to move towards a circular economy? How do we raise the level of importance of water amongst the business sector, where a difference can be made, because that's where the money's going to come from? But how do we get people to see the urgency of opting into this and becoming a part of or supporting the South African Water Chamber? What are some of the challenges, and how do you think we can change the conversation?
Yeah, so I think the important thing is we saw the debate in Cape Town, and there's an old saying that, when you have no water, that's when you understand the value of water, or when you have to carry it yourself. And unfortunately, we have a very short memory as people, because when there's water in the taps, it's fine. But when there's no water, very quickly, and I think Gauteng is realizing it now, and there's, all of a sudden. But water is becoming central to the discourse. Now, Benoit talked about the 3 years that we've been involved with the Water Chamber. And I think that, the original founders and the steering committee have done a lot of heavy lifting in order to clear the site, in order to get the groundwork so that we can start building together. And very often people don't see that vision at the early stage. But I think we're now at a position where we can start as an industry building this building that we've envisaged. Because I do believe that the groundwork has been done. I do believe that we now have an enabling. When we started off as a chamber, we identified 3 main areas. The first one was policy certainty. The second one was regulatory certainty. And the third one was a contracting framework. Now, if you look at the NIP 2050 that we've alluded to, all 3 those areas are being addressed. We have a water master plan. We have an independent regulator, which is coming next year. And we're now engaging very seriously on that contracting interface, which is what Tony has spoken about. So we're now ready. And I think now is the time for business and business interests to throw their weight in behind the chamber, to say, okay, fine, you know what, we can now start seeing the picture, we can now start tasting the success. How do we now get involved, and how do we put our weight behind this? Because when you start having motion, and when there's a little bit of movement, you need to get all of your weight behind that and start pushing it. And I think that's where we are at this point in time.
Thanks for that. Anthony, if I can bring you into the conversation, what are some of the challenges that we are currently having that needs to be solved to move towards water security. And I wanted to also just touch a little bit on, you always talk about water being a flux and not a stock. And that is fundamental to part of the problem that we have. If you can just expand a little bit on that for us.
Yes, I think the challenge we need to understand in the context of our constitution. So when we became a democracy in 1994, the Department of Water and Affairs and Forestry, as it was then known, delegated responsibility for water service provision to municipalities. But at the very same time, there was major restructuring taking place in the country. We went from 4 provinces to however many we've got now, multiple provinces, and different municipalities were amalgamated with others, and we got metros, and we got all very, very, very complicated and very, very messy. So the reality is that the responsibility for water service provision, which implies the planning thereof, has been devolved down to municipal level at the very place where there's been the most pressure for transformation. Now, I'm not opposed in any way to transformation. We need to transform our society and our economy. There's no question doubt about that. But the unintended consequence of that was a massive loss of skills. So we have a situation now where the municipalities have been expected to do long-term planning in an area that they've never, ever, ever, even before 1994, had those core skills. It just never, ever happened. So that's the one thing that's the one problem that we have today. So let me just give you one example now. If you look at wastewater works, probably 60% of our wastewater works, maybe more, are dysfunctional in some form or other. Now, in order to repair that damage, if we just look at Mfuleni, 2 billion rand has been spent on that wastewater problem, and we're still no closer today than we were when they started looking at that problem. And the reason is simple. Nobody has actually looked at that problem in a bigger context. They've only looked at the wastewater problem. So I think this is the value add that we can bring. And I'm working, for example, right now in the Ugu municipality in Port Shepstone. I'm working very closely with the decision makers there. And there we have a perfect example now, where there's a small wastewater works, approximately 20 megaliter a day wastewater works, that needs to be refurbished, and that's a project on its own. Now, that's not bankable in any way, shape, or form from the private sector for various reasons. But then there's another problem in the Port Shepstone area. There's a 100 megaliter per day water deficit. And the Mzimkhulu River, can't supply that water as it currently is configured, because the river's over abstracted. So now we have a case where we can start considering seawater desalination on a municipal scale, on a proper scale. But in so doing, with leadership such as ours, we can now link those two projects together. So we can actually factor in the wastewater refurbishment as part and parcel of the seawater desalination plant, because by improving the quality of the wastewater effluent discharge back into the environment, that same water now goes into your incoming stream for desalination, which reduces the osmotic pressure, reduces the level of salinity, therefore reduces the energy cost needed to get desalinated seawater, and ultimately changes the business model. So it's that business thinking, that commercial thinking that we bring to municipalities to help them to actually convert existing problem projects into bankable entities by clustering them together or linking one thing to another and helping them to build a business case. And at the end of the day, it's not about privatizing water. That's not that at all. It's about producing water at the lowest possible unit cost. And in this context, we've got to produce water at a unit cost equal to or better than that which comes from existing surface water provision. So I think this is kind of revolutionary, if you like, because this is really the value of bringing private sector and the public sector together into a more intimate relationship. You asked me about this flux and stock thing. Well, I've just explained it now in the context of the Ugu case, where I believe we can literally establish a benchmark a program that can become a foundation for establishing job security, economic security, greater prosperity in an area that is deeply impoverished and getting poorer by the day. So we just need a couple of these projects to get off the ground, to become bankable, to attract capital back into the the economy. And I'll close off by saying that you referred to the day zero crisis. And during that period of time, I was contracted by Vic Water, the bulk water provider in the state of Victoria in Australia, to do some external peer review on their 10-year strategic plan. And Melbourne and Cape Town have got exactly the same climate, exactly the same water constraints, exactly the same problems, in fact, okay? They're almost identical mirror images of each other. The difference between the two is that Melbourne has gone the seawater desalination route and is now attracting capital to such an extent that the city is awash with money, and they are capable of creating such certainty for investors that they are now able to wean themselves off their scarce surface water supplies and start to rehabilitate their surface water resources. So, think about rehabilitating water resources, distressed water aquatic ecosystems, rehabilitating them with high technology seawater desalination. I mean, these are two completely opposite concepts. But if you bring that together in a creative way, that's exactly what's been happening in Melbourne. That's exactly what we can do down here in the Ugu district of Port Shepstone. This is exactly what South Africa needs to do. And we need to use a Zulu word, Vulindlela, to show the way. We need to open up the road. We need those Vulindlela projects to show the way into a better future for us all.
Anthony, I always appreciate your glass half full attitude towards, water resilience. I do want to ask you, just to stay with you for a moment, there's been a lot of resistance in South Africa towards desalination as part of the solution. It's not the only solution. What are some of the things that in your opinion gives us so much resistance towards desalination as a solution? And could you debunk just some of those myths that are going around about desalination? One of them being that it's too expensive, for example. We hear that all the time, or that, it's bad for the environment. Could you just dispel some of that? Because I think that's an important conversation to be had as well.
Sorry, who are you asking? You're asking. I think Benoit's the best one, because Benoit's a numbers person.
Benoit.
Thanks, Tony. I suspect you might say that. Look, yeah, I use the adage, the independent water producers and the IPP, independent power producers. Now, if you have a careful look at it, the water, there's multiple buyers with local authorities, whereas the IPP is a national buyer through the Eskom office. That's a bit simpler. And moving electrons, it's a lot easier than moving, water molecules. However, the latest prices in the world are below 40 US cents, so 6 Rand a cubic meter. So for desalinated water on the coast in highly saline environments. So in the Middle East, North Africa region. So the salinity is a lot lower in the Indian Ocean. So the osmotic pressure is low. It means you need to put less energy into it. So at 6 Rand, we are below the cheapest in the country, which are about 7.50 Rand for bulk water. So Amatola water, Mganis and the likes. If you look at Rand Water, they're selling their water just 14.88 or 15 Rand, their bulk water on average. It varies a bit, but to Joburg, to Gauteng, it's 15 Rand a cubic meter. That's more than double. So what we have found is the debate that desalination is expensive has disappeared. That's completely disappeared. The debate that is energy intensive, it used to be 10 to 12 kilowatt hour per cubic meter of water. It is now 2.5 to 4. It's like the LEDs, light emitting diodes that we have that replace the CFLs, that replace the tungsten carbide filament type bulbs. What's happened is the technology has evolved, and it's evolved very rapidly. So the energy intensity is lower. The next thing is it can be without any carbon or fossil fuel, because what we're finding is the latest generation of utility scale, so over 50 million liters a day or 50 megaliters a day, the concept is starting to show results now that we can run it off renewable energy. So Sydney was built on that basis, but it's fed from the grid, and they displaced what the plant needed with the wind farm built next to it at the same time. So it was an offset, like a carbon offset. That was 10 years ago, 12 years ago. The technology now, and there's intermittence in renewable, and what we're finding is we can store it, and we can also connect it to the grid so that we have the grid as a backup. So the issue that we are taking precious energy off the grid, that debate has gone away. So that's 2 out of 3. The third one is the environmental issue, where we are increasing the salinity of the sea. That's absolute nonsense. The sea desalinates every day. It's the natural water cycle through evaporation. What does happen is point source increase in salinity, and there's 2 ways of overcoming it. One, good engineering. We have no issue. The second one is by doing what Tony was talking about as a remix, where we use treated sewage with seawater, so the brine that goes back, the return flow, has the same salinity as what we took in. So there's no environmental impact. So we've taken the cost issue, we've taken the energy issue, and then we've taken the environmental issue. So taking a bit of salt out of a lot of water is not an issue, and we're finding zero resistance, okay, in general now. So we are ready. So our fleet has to be 1,600 megaliters a day for seawater desalination. And just to add a last number, it's about 600 megaliters a day of acid mine drainage, which needs to be desalinated inland. And then we're the world leaders with 99% recovery, with seawater is roughly 50-60%. So if you have a look at it from a numbers perspective, it's clear the business case is good. And South Africa is entirely on board, including the groundwater guys who said you can't desalinate. What we're saying is no silver bullet. It's groundwater, surface water, reuse, addressing non-water revenue, and taking salt out of water. If you put those all in, we have a very nice mix. Cape Town is embarking on that, so that you're splitting your risk, so you're not dependent on any one thing. So you decouple yourself from any one big risk. And what happens is, so Cape Town says they can go from 97 to 99% availability with a very small price increase, which is not much, and they're spending 4 billion a year in actually doing that. So it's not going to cost the end user actually anymore. So the numbers don't lie. So desalination is offshore and onshore is an absolute solution. And South Africa, luckily, is one of the pioneers, and it's one of the things we can reindustrialize our water sector, because we have the know-how and we've been exporting it. So the biggest in the world, Veolia, and the Israelis with IDE and the likes, that tech, that IP is proudly South African. And I'll stop there. I'm going to carry on for 2 hours on that one alone.
Thanks very much for that. Tony, if I can bring you back into the conversation here. Why is the conversation about water as a flux so important, and renewable water? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yes, okay. That's I'm going to take you on a different journey through that one. I'm going to give you something you haven't heard before. Okay, so we know that water flows in time and space. So we know that South Africa has got let's call it 50 billion cubic meters of water per annum. That's what we have in all our rivers. We need 63 by 2035 if we're going to create full employment. So we've got a shortfall there. And that shortfall is basically going to be what we call new water to be recycled. So we've got to start you harnessing the power of nature that infinitely recycles water on its own. But now the new sort of thing I want to add to the story is that we do the same with capital. Because this 1 trillion rand we're going to invest into the economy of private sector capital, it could be a blended finance model of different sources of capital, and that's a very, very important conversation. It's a technical conversation for another time. But once we put in 1 trillion rand into the economy, if that is properly managed, and it will be through these SPVs we're talking about, we can now conservatively have a multiplier of between 3 and 5. So effectively, for every rand we're putting into the economy, we can expect 3 to 5 rands worth of additional knock-on effect to happen in the economy. So that's something like putting 5 trillion rand into the economy, because capital, like water, is a flux. It moves in time and space. So we've got to think about water and capital in the same way, as moving in time and space. And as it moves, with every transaction that it does, it generates a little bit of tax for government. It generates a livelihood for somebody. It generates a little profit on it, which is taxed once again to government. In fact, it generates multiple taxes. And those taxes are the things that sustains all of the services that government has to offer to a deeply impoverished society. So water and capital are both fluxes. They move in time and space. And this has got to be an important message that we've got to start getting across through the chamber. And we are making inroads in that regard at the moment.
Thanks very much for that. Fred, if I can circle back to you, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot there, but could you expand a little bit on what exactly the Water and Sanitation Master Plan is?
Well, you know what, Benoit's far better at that than I am, so, so I'll pass it to him. But before I do, I think what Tony's talking about, Tony and I have got this thing when we don't know the answer, we pass it to Benoit. But the important thing to understand, and I think what Tony's talking about, is that we've got to put the whole issue of water central to our economic discourse in the country. You've got to understand that water historically is the ultimate economic enabler. You settled next to a water course, you built economic activity there. So when we look at the cost, of desal or recycling or whatever it may be, there's a direct cost, but what is the cost of not doing it? And what is the impact? And Tony spoke about the economic impact of giving water security to the investment community. It's phenomenal. But not only that, I think what's important to understand is that our whole spatial planning in this country is 40 plus year, much longer old. It replicates the old apartheid spatial planning, and without putting water into these previously disadvantaged communities, we will just see massive urbanization, pressure on the major cities, infrastructure collapsing, etc. So we cannot just look at the cost of water, but we've got to say, what is the cost to the economy of not having sufficient water? And then, as we spoke about, we've got this hierarchy. The first thing is you don't put water into a leaking bucket. So if your infrastructure is leaking, you got to fix it first. The second thing is you got to keep your water in your system, and you got to recycle and reuse and whatever. And then you got to look at how do you supplement it. But that really has formed the foundation of the Water Master Plan, which, Benoit, you can maybe just take from there.
Sure. So the master plan is really, to me, what's really important is what it does. It says, this is what we have, this is where we need to be, and this is the gap that needs closing, and this is the price and the time frame. So we said 10 years, it was 890 billion rand, and the first thing is plug the leaks in the bucket, but simultaneously, and this is the speak at the moment, is we don't do one then next. Simultaneously, we reuse water, and simultaneously we desalinate water to get new water into the system. And by doing that, we will be water secure within the next 10 years. So we haven't had a master plan for a decade. At least we've got a plan now. And whether the number is that or double that, the issue is that there's a plan to work with. But what this talks to is a national development plan, which is a bigger economic plan. And in there, it says we have failed. The water has failed because we didn't have a plan, et cetera, et cetera. And to overcome it, we need to do these actions like independent water producers, we need a water regulator, and we need private sector participation. Out of that, a subset now is the NIP 2050, National Infrastructure Plan 2050. And what that says is that next year we will have an independent water regulator. Boom, that's it. We will also have a national infrastructure agency that's been gazetted, but now we're going to do it next year. And by 2023, we will have the private sector participating in financing, capacity building, engineering, and operation management of short, medium, and long-term independent water producer and, let's say, joint ventures with water service authorities and water service providers. This is what it says. So for us, the NIP 2050 is actually a consequence of the NDP into the National Master Plan, into the National Infrastructure Master Plan. So now, when you've got a plan, you can go ahead. And if the plan is incorrect, you modify as you go ahead. But it's going to help us hold all the players. So the private sector, the public sector, and government, the civil servants, and the political parties accountable. You said we are going to do this. We have collaborated. We have widely discussed it. So the cabinet is going to endorse this. And this is going to be, I think, for us, a new dawn, because what it does, it puts water in the same realm as energy and telecommunications. Energy, the new energy, is all private. We know that. It's not denationalizing anything. It's private sector participation. Telecoms, we're talking here through an internet that's really controlled. The policies by government, but it's controlled by the private sector. The MTNs, the Vodacoms, and all the likes. We're just going to do the same with the water. We're just going to make it professional, very competitive, to make sure prices are not inflated and the likes. So there will be good competition. But the nice thing is what Tony talks about is the spin-off of this master plan is at least 1 year of national GDP. And that's 5 trillion rand. The government budget is 1.5 trillion. So it's a third of that. We all know it's out of proportion, it's too high. But if you have a look at it, if we double that to 6, 7, 8, 9, to eventually 10 trillion rand, okay, the government budget stays at 1.5, it becomes insignificant. Now there's money to go around, there's jobs to go around, and the lubricant is actually water. And the master plan is fundamental to that. And what we're saying is that master plan has to stay on the front stage, and every 5 years, with the NDP, with the NIP 2050, and the industrialization plan, has to be modified, edited, relooked at every 5 years minimum. And I think we're well on our way to that. So, yeah. You muted, Bridget.
Thanks for crunching the numbers for us there, Benoit. Anthony, if I can switch over to you, one of the questions from the viewers here, and I think it's a typical question that I've seen often before, and that question came up when we were talking about desalination as one of the solutions. And so the question is, how about cleaning rainwater for use and stop altering nature? Are we altering nature?
No, we're not altering nature. If you're sure you can clean up rainwater. Rainwater is what ends up in the river and dam, and that's what we use anyhow, okay? So we use rainwater at the moment. The problem with any of these engineered designs is you've got to have a constant, steady supply of water going into your plant. So the first question I'd ask is, do we have a constant, steady supply of rainfall, yes or no? And the answer now is, if no, well, then you've got to store it. So once you store it, you start changing the cost of the thing. Now you've got huge storage containers which start get contaminated over time. So ultimately, it comes down to the very simple logic. You've got to have a stable supply of feedstock water that you can put through your plant and your steady state plant. And that's where the desalination thing comes in. But I'm now just going to add another dimension to this, just to show you, what the benefits are. Benoit mentioned the fact that we're talking about a third or a quarter of the GDP of the country. We're talking potentially big numbers here, and this is happening in a very, very gloomy moment in our history, where we need numbers like this. We've got to think big. We've got to be ambitious to turn the ship around, because it's in our interest to do that. So now let's quickly answer another question now, because we are in the water and technology and capital space. How do we bring capital and technology to bear in the water sector? But how do we link? I mentioned earlier on, how do we link a wastewater project to a desalination project to change the economics favorably? Now, exactly the same happens when you start going to energy. So the latest thing in the renewable energy space is, how do you store energy that comes off your non-renewable grid, your renewable energy grid, because that's not always available in a constant flow. So basically, you've got to store it somewhere. You either store it in a battery, or you store it in some other container. And of course, the emerging technology now is in hydrogen. Now let's quickly look at the hydrogen thing. I mentioned earlier on that we're talking about this creation of this desalination plant down at Port Shepstone. Let's just talk about a theoretical 60 megaliter per day desalination plant. If you take 10 megaliters per day of that desalinated seawater and you split that into hydrogen and oxygen, you are storing energy and you are selling high value energy, which then cross subsidizes your production desalinated water. So in other words, the point I'm trying to make here now is that once you're into that technology space where capital is interested and willing to flow, you can now start building very creative business cases and enterprises around this. So you can literally start thinking about what the Germans are thinking about right now. The Germans are doing a deal with Namibia. Namibia, one of the most water-constrained countries in the world. But because it's got such a high solar energy capability, they're talking about investing into solar energy in Namibia to split desalinated water into hydrogen as part of the hydrogen economy going forward. Now, this is mind-boggling stuff, you see. And this is the kind of big dream, the kind of big vision that we need as a nation. This is the kind of thing we need to kickstart our economy, to move from that linear, extractive, make waste, discard kind of throwaway economy into a new integrated circular economy. We still have those skills available in South Africa. This is the kind of big dream, big vision that we start needing to turn the ship around, because we can still do it, we need to do it, and we will do it.
You're muted, Brigitte.
Apologies. If there are any big business out there, Fred, that are wanting to support the South African Water Chamber, how can they get involved? And then after you've done that, if we can just sort of wrap up a bit.
Perfect. Yeah. Look, obviously, what as we've mentioned, we founded the Water Chamber. I think we've done a lot of the heavy lifting over time, and a lot of time and effort has gone into getting it where it is now. Critically, I think we're at a junction where we need to get business involved, where we need to get to broaden the base of participation. So, anyone who wants to join the chamber, please get hold of us. You can get us on our LinkedIn page or on our Facebook page, and make contact with us, because we'd love to get you involved in whatever way. If you feel that you would like to contribute skills, or you want to contribute in a particular area, we are certainly at a point now where we are looking for additional partners to say, get involved with us. Let's take there's a big job ahead of us. Let's break it into components, and let's push it through, and let's be the partner to government that shows the way forward, and that embraces this move that we've seen now to the benefit of our country and to the benefit of its inhabitants. And let's turn water into the ultimate change that we've been wanting to see, both economically as well as politically in the country.
Thanks very much for that, Fred. Benoit, if we can have any final words from you to wrap up.
Yes, and taking off where Fred has mentioned, new members and the likes. What we'd like to do over the next period with these webinars is actually highlight that we have more than the required technology and implementation skills in this country, and with our networks, we export technology and we import it also, is through these webinars to actually share with the market and with stakeholders as to what we're able to do. And there's some quite interesting, innovative, be it waterless sanitation through to decentralized modular units and the likes. And then also, yes, we can spend some time on the upcoming green hydrogen revolution, which really merges renewable water and renewable energy. And just a small number, 200 million euros was invested into South Africa to, in actual fact, open up projects. And those tenders closed middle of this year. It's already happened. It's not happening, it's already happened. So we have embedded energy, not only in sewage, but in water, in that dihydrogen oxide molecule. So really exciting times, and I look forward to sharing that with our sector. Thank you.
Benoit, would you like to take that question on the screen, or Anthony?
I understand where the question's coming from is, I don't think we're going to get a consolidation. What we're going to do is, in the NIP 2050 talks about this, is that we're going to see better coordination between national, provincial, and local government. And the NIP 2050 has a program management office, a PMO, or project management office. They use the word program management office, whereby capacity can be instilled from the private sector and from national government that has limited capacity to local government, where the action is going to be, as Tony spoke about. And that's going to be done in a transparent manner that is gazetted. And so we see a project steering committee or program steering committee happening at a national level that is transparent and joining those dots. So the TCTAs and all the likes are very specific. They have a very specific mandate also. They're able to raise bonds and all the likes, but that's just in bulk water. What we've got to do is take the bulk water, we've got to take the interbasin transfers, we've got to take the distribution systems and the new water manufacturing systems, and that has to be put into, let's say, cohesive structures like SPVs, and then coordinated nationally. So no one single big bullet. It's going to be a whole lot of decentralized, and the trick is in coordinating it, I think.
Thanks very much for that. Any final words from you, Anthony?
Yes, I think you've seen from this conversation today, there's been a lot of work that's been taking place behind the scenes. This has been done out of the glare of media publicity, because it's kind of been diplomatic, back channel diplomacy, for want of a better word. And I think we're moving to a situation now where we can start giving more feedback. And I thank you very much for making your platform available. We hope to start giving more regular feedback in the future to hold ourselves accountable. We're setting a very, very high standard here. But I think the very, very important thing that's coming out of today's session is that there's a lot of hope in this water sector. There's a vision for a really, really good future. And I think the thing of an independent water regulator on the one hand, and independent water providers, this is going to be a radical new thing in the future, where you're going to start getting greater accountability in those entities that are going to be closer to the final point of consumption. And I'll just close it by saying one thing, that the Municipal Financial Management Act has got one gap in it, in the sense that your executive decision makers are not held accountable for any bad decisions that they make. And for that reason, you could find a person that has maybe been involved in fraudulent activities, but because they're politically favored, they get recycled out of one position into another one. They just go from one place to the next, and they never really solve the problem. With these special purpose vehicles, we're closing that gap quite specifically, because with the Companies Act, which is a part of that SPV component, the Companies Act has got very specific responsibilities for people that are in fiduciary positions. So people that are making executive decisions on behalf of other people's money, they are going to be held legally accountable. And I think this is a very, very important step in the right direction, because it's going to start rebuilding society, rebuilding our economy, but in a more robust and more sort of resilient way. So that's my closing statement here. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. And I want to say thank you to our audience today who has participated. And we will be turning this into a series of conversations. So do keep an eye out for the notice of when the next one will occur. And again, if you have missed the introduction, the South African Water Chamber was established to form a credible link between organized, private sector and government, and these conversations will be feedback to you about where we are at in this process and how you can contribute, not only the private sector, but water is a conversation we need to be having every single day, because it's at the heart of who we are and what we do, and how we survive. So thanks everyone for joining us. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you.